Welcome everyone. This is our talk on how to replace Google Analytics with RudderStack, Hex, and Snowflake. I'm joined today by Eric Dodds, who leads product marketing at RudderStack, and Benjamin Walward, who's a solutions engineer at RudderStack. And we're going to cover first what is web analytics and why almost every company uses it. And most companies use Google Analytics to do that. And then we're going to cover what the problems are with Google Analytics and what the solution is, moving to a warehouse native analytics stack. So with that, I'll let Eric Dodds first talk about what web analytics is and what the problems with Google Analytics are.
Thanks so much, Matt. Always a pleasure to chat analytics with you. So let's talk about web analytics. The web has been around for decades and decades now, and tracking, really, when you think about self-serve analytics, there weren't a ton of options, and several players very early on. Google was the first one to market with a really powerful self-serve analytics tool that allowed you to actually install a script on your website and accomplish some pretty amazing things out of the box. So, all of a sudden, instead of running a difficult technical analytics tool or working with your database team to, get data out of the database, all of a sudden users could install a script and then understand, oh, wow, here's how users are interacting with my content, right? Oh, I'm selling items online. Here's how many sales that I got yesterday and what pages they came from. Or here's where pages are not converting. So those are opportunities to optimize. So really hugely powerful. And again, Google is sort of the first one to market and did an incredible job of capturing market share, right? Not a ton of other options as robust or easy to use. And because the web was largely desktop browser based, for the first while that it came about and before the mobile revolution, which happened, a lot of people say around 2007, 2008, when the iPhone hit the market, you have most of the world who's looking at web analytics using Google Analytics. But Google Analytics also has some limitations. So let's dig in and look at some of those. Because Google Analytics came of age mainly focused on websites, it does a really good job at capturing the very first part of the user journey, right? And so we can think of these things as, people viewing pages, people taking basic actions like clicking a button, and then sort of the limit of what you can track with Google Analytics are things like a sign up or a conversion. And it does a pretty good job of that. It does have a couple of significant issues, though. One is vendor lock-in. Previously, you couldn't get data out of Google Analytics Classic unless you paid an enormous amount of money. GA4 has made that easier, but it's primarily for Google Cloud products. And so we'll talk about this in a little bit. But you sort of move from like one vendor lock-in flavor to another one with GA4. Another major issue that people have had, and this is increasing significantly in modern day where we have access to a lot better, more granular data, is that Google Analytics doesn't capture a complete view of the data. That's for a couple reasons. They're notoriously blocked by ad blockers. So we've seen companies, lose 20, 30, 40% of their data simply from blocking. But as Benji will talk about a little bit later, they've largely collected data in the same way, and their payloads lack a huge amount of fidelity. Modern data teams have moved beyond that at this point, and they need granular, complete data. Lastly, Google Analytics operates in a black box. This is a big problem with GA Classic. It's the same problem with GA4. We don't know exactly how much sampling is going on, but Google Analytics processes data in the background. and their features around identity resolution and other components within the platform are opaque. And so many times you can get a directional sense of what's going on, but in reality, it can be very difficult to get a granular view of what's going on. But that's increasingly what data teams need in order to support business growth. The user journey for modern day teams, and the reason that they need granular, complete data, is that it goes far beyond those first couple touches on your website, right? It may include multi-platform data. So your website, your mobile app, your server-side app, that's actually delivering your software. And then you layer in additional data points like payment systems. And so if we think about this as a user going to a website, actually signing up for your application, or creating an account, or making a purchase, they go through multiple steps. There's product activation. Are they using features? Are they inviting their friends or additional users? And then ultimately, are they upgrading to a paid plan? So one of the biggest pain points foundationally with Google Analytics is that it is unable to capture this complete customer journey. But in order to optimize a business with data, you need the entire picture. Now, this whole situation is made even more challenging for data teams because there is a deadline to switch from Google Analytics Classic to Google Analytics 4. And that is happening very, very soon in a couple months here, and it's causing a lot of pain. Now, the punchline here is that it is not easy to migrate from Google Analytics Classic to Google Analytics 4. It's a completely different event-based paradigm in GA4. It requires more instrumentation. It requires you to build out a lot of reports that you use in Google Analytics Classic that are not out of the box in GA4, and really requires a completely new learning curve for many people used to GA Classic. So significant changes. And that means that data teams are going to have to do a lot of work around migration, no matter what they do, right? If we migrate to GA4, we're probably going to do a lot of work. That's why a lot of data teams are actually focusing on a warehouse native approach and actually taking web analytics from living in a closed system like Google Analytics and taking it into the warehouse to use tools like RudderStack, Snowflake, and Hex to build those web analytics. Benji, break down the warehouse native approach for us.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Here at RudderStack, we have this conversation on a daily basis with our customers. And, there's some key highlights to why you would want to take a warehouse approach to defining your user journey and building out conversions in the warehouse. And so if we go back to our Google Analytics example where we've historically had a fairly decent capture rate of website traffic. So thinking about those page views and maybe signing up or submitting an email address to subscribe to a newsletter or capture a coupon code. But beyond that, we have no visibility or very little visibility into kind of what the user or users are then doing within the product or within our CRM tools. And so that's why we're so fond of actually doing this analysis in the warehouse. And tools like RudderStack help customers do that. So we want to extend the visibility of the user journey, not just from the website capturing our clickstream behavior, but we can also capture server-side events, which are not blocked directly from our applications. And then we can also capture data from other cloud tools or SaaS tools through ETL integrations. And this allows us to get a very complete picture of the warehouse. And when you have this data in the warehouse, that means you can now define your definition of a conversion. And so that might be, no longer someone just signing up for a newsletter or providing an email address, but it might be actually signing up for the app, inviting a coworker to join, and then finally converting to a fully paid plan. And so having this flexibility in the warehouse is really attractive on a number of different fronts. It also gives you flexibility to define kind of what your definition of a session is or a user engagement. And so those are also kind of very powerful things. One key thing about owning, building your user journey and doing your analytics in the warehouse is that you have ultimate flexibility and no vendor lock-in. And this is really important for a lot of our customers. And you also have full visibility into the user journey and the full customer lifecycle, because you can capture data at a much more granular level. And not only is that at a much more granular level, but you can customize the payloads and you can specify exactly what data you need to get. And anyone who's kind of started collecting data and looking at this data in the warehouse, you understand that kind of just what identifiers you use, what properties you use, what values you pass. Seems all pretty straightforward when you start to instrument things, but then once you get data in the warehouse, you realize, all right, we're capturing full names versus first names and IDs versus hashed user email addresses and this, that, and the other. But having all that data in the warehouse and having the flexibility to design and instrument the payloads from each of your sources is incredibly valuable and powerful. So let's take a look at kind of just a sample comparison of what a payload in GA4 looks like versus something like RudderStack. And Eric, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but on the left here we see a standard event payload from Google that we have very little flexibility, and it again only goes to GA4. And then your only option from that point is exporting that to BigQuery. And versus on the RudderStack side, you see there's a whole host of information about the client, and in this case, a web browser and a JavaScript SDK. But within this RudderStack event call, you can then pass whatever payloads, whatever properties or user attributes you want from the browser. And now to break down kind of how this is done and some of the tools that we use, I'll have Matt walk us through a brief overview of an analytics stack.
Thanks, Benji. Yeah, so as Benji just showed us, the payload from RudderStack, much more in-depth, and so we can dump that into Snowflake through RudderStack very easily, and then transform that data, define, as Benji mentioned, what we want our conversions to be, and then we can visualize that information in Hex. So, just at a basic level, we can take web events and produce something similar to the Google Analytics dashboard, which I'll demo in a moment. But you can also see with this extra data, we could actually do much more beyond just web analytics. We can combine it with other sources of data to have full funnel conversion tracking and a whole host of other things. Another big advantage here of having all that data in the warehouse is that you can then send that data out from the warehouse. So RudderStack's a tool that lets you do that as well. There's a few vendors in this space, and it's incredibly powerful, especially around marketing automation. Again, much better than having data in Google Analytics, which is kind of hard to move around, especially at the level of granularity you need if you're going to be sending emails that need, actual people's email addresses versus just kind of sampled data from Google Analytics. So now, just if you aren't already familiar with Hex, Hex is the platform for secure collaborative data science and analytics, and we are going to use Hex in order to replicate this Google Analytics dashboard. So we'll spend a second here just to kind of note what are we seeing here. So we're seeing trends over time around the number of users, sessions, bounce rate, session duration. We're seeing where people are visiting our website all around the globe, and we're seeing where is this traffic coming from different types of channels, as well as some other graphs on here that we'll replicate as well. So now let me hop into a demo of replicating this dashboard inside of Hex. And here you can see our Google Analytics dashboard replicated here in Hex. So as you can see at the beginning, we have all the same stats that Google provides, user session, bounce rate, and so on. You can select what time range you want to look at the data by. We're doing comparisons over previous periods. We can graph this data over time, see how it's been trending, combine metrics to see if there are any correlations. We can also look at how we acquire users. So using stacked bar charts here, the tooltip, you can see which sources or medium are driving new traffic, as well as refers. We can then just aggregate the data behind each of those unique refers or channels to see what were the main sources of traffic overall for this time period. We're actually able even to mimic the Insights tab in Google Analytics that has text kind of telling you what happened. Here we're using Markdown and some dynamic fields, which I'll show in a moment how we do this. We're able to replicate the heat map showing what day of the week, at what time people are visiting the site, as well as what pages do your users visit, how often. Oftentimes a lot of people just want to see the data in a table. We're also able to replicate the pie chart showing the breakdown of what sessions were done by which device or how many were. And we can do a full cohort chart here to show how we're retaining users over time. In addition, we have a map showing where people in the world came from to visit your site, as well as something that Google Analytics doesn't have, which is forecasting. So since Hex allows you to use Python and SQL together, we were able to build out a forecast of what traffic might look like in the future. Obviously, you can see here this is probably being heavily impacted by these outliers, but this is a sort of analysis you can layer on top of the traditional Google Analytics experience. So with that, let me jump into the back end and we can talk about how all this is created and how you can duplicate this dashboard into your own workspace. Okay, so how did we build this? We're leveraging the data from RudderStack, and to kind of get our notebook started here, we imported a bunch of libraries in order to do some of the visualizations and transformations we wanted to do. That data that we're getting from RudderStack used dbt to create basically a package or a set of tables, models that transform their raw data into very usable rolled up versions of the data. So we can see here we're pulling the data in from one of RudderStack's dbt tables where they've rolled up the information, and so you can see all the sorts of pieces of information that you'd like in a very easy to read table here with source, channel, refer, device type, total sessions, and this is per day. So per day, per source medium, per channel, per refer, what are we getting in all of these metrics? That makes it rather easy to work with. We can also pull in just the number of the number of anonymous IDs from one of their other tables, which again is very easy to aggregate by day, so we can see users by day. But again, the thing to realize here about using a tool like RudderStack, which has access to much more and raw data for your website visitors, is that there are a ton of very specific details that they're pulling in for you. So this is one of their raw tables, which we'll leverage in some of the charts below. I believe their raw tables have over 200 columns, so lots of possibilities here to explore in the data however you'd like. So if we go back to what we needed to create to make this dashboard, we started off with those sort of session and user metrics up top. So we are grabbing all of those metrics here and then printing them out here. And we're going to then use Python in order to aggregate these metrics. You could use SQL to do this as well, but one of the beauties of Hex is that all outputs from either SQL or Python is stored as a data frame, and so that data frame is accessible to both SQL and Python inside of a Hex notebook. So we can just sort of succinctly perform these aggregations in Python, which will make them easier to use. And if you remember, we were comparing that data to a previous period. So we needed to grab basically that same exact data, but just from whatever the period was we were comparing to. And so here you can see we're pulling in the same data, aggregating it the same way, and then here we're visualizing those 4 sets of data, as well as creating the visualizations that were the line charts over time. And so all of these visualizations here are with Hex's no-code visualization cells, which are extremely easy to use. You just pick which data frame you'd like to use, select which columns that you'd like, and it's going to make you a great looking chart. Here's the other chart we used. Again, similar setup here, selecting the data frame and then the relevant columns. Next, moving into the acquisition section of the dashboard, we also gave a time range there, so you could look at one time range at the top for your session user metrics and another time range for your acquisition if you'd like. You could also make that just one input to control everything, up to you. And then here we're just going in and again pulling all the data initially from this rolled up table from RudderStack to look at it. You can see again, just very easy to use this information. Highly recommend you check out their DBT package that has these tables available for you. And then we're pulling in that same data just from the previous period. So again, we can do those comparisons. Top prefers, again, very similar query here, just pulling in very straightforward data. And also for top channel refers. So all these were just very simple queries out of this great table, great set of tables that RudderStack has provided. And then again, for visualizations, we can just drop in the data frame, pick what type, pick our columns, and Hex is going to make a great chart for you. So all of these charts are built on the same kind of sets of data above. So now let's get into maybe where it gets a little more interesting. So sometimes we actually need that raw data in order to build certain types of charts. So if we want to show how often individual people are coming back, or what times a day that same individual is coming back to the site, we need to know who the unique users are. And that's really great that we can get to that with the raw unaggregated pages table rather than their generated DBT table. So you can see here we're pulling in this user ID, which allows us to uniquely identify them. And then we're pulling in also the months. So these are actually, this is going to power that dynamic text that we talked about before. So we're pulling in, get the list of users who came in this month, and then we have to get the users who came in the previous month, and then we can kind of establish, this is like some rather complicated code here, code here, but this is just Jinja, where we're saying how we are pulling in, if there is more users this month than last month, we use one set of text. If there's less users than the previous month, we use a different set, and if there's the same, then we have another set of text. So we're using if then in Jinja in order to provide dynamic text, which is again pulling in the month name here, the count of how many people returned, And then we're doing even a ratio here of how many people returned versus how many people are here in the current active month. So kind of a lot going on here, but it's just here to demonstrate kind of the power of what you can do with Hex, combining Jinja, a data frame originally coming from SQL and Python in order to make just really powerful type metrics even in text and Markdown. Here, this is producing our heat map data set. So we have all this data, but heat map is not a supported no-code visualization yet in Hex. And one of the powerful things about Hex is that doesn't matter. If you want to do that, you can do that. You just have to write in the code yourself. Now, we didn't know how to create a heat map with Python off the top of our head. So we used Hex's new magic functionality, which leverages AI to generate code. And so you can see we initially asked it to create a chart of when users visit the site using the visit times data frame. And then it generated all of this code and documented it for us. So pretty impressive. Would highly recommend checking out Magic if you haven't yet already. But this was completely generated by AI, which then allowed us to produce a heat map chart, which Hex doesn't support. So Magic really extends your ability to do any type of analysis inside of Hex, which is just incredibly powerful. Here we're back to very straightforward data on showing sessions by device, simple query from the rolled up table, simple data, grabbing that data frame and then choosing pie chart. Very simple. What pages do your users visit? Again, very straightforward table here, grabbing from RudderStack's pages table. Here, this is one of the most common things people want to see is I just want to see the data, what was the URL, how many views, very easy to get with this data set. How will you retain users? So this is, again, an instance where we're going to need the unaggregated raw data. So a little bit more complicated here in order to grab that initial set of data. We're grabbing the user ID along with the cohort week, so the week that they first came to the site. And then we have a row for every week that they came again. So a little bit large of a table to kind of contain all of that information. We then are taking that data and then aggregating it, saying, by cohort week, how many users came back, each of the weeks. But then we need to pivot that data in order to make it appropriate for a cohort analysis chart. So you can see we're pivoting that data here. And then again, a little bit complicated, but again, shows you the power of what you can do in Hex. You can create your own custom chart here and produce a great looking cohort chart. So this is, again, built for you. So if you are using RudderStack and connect those tables that we mentioned before that RudderStack provides to this notebook, this will be automatically generated for you. Another interesting technical challenge was how do we actually show where visitors are when they're visiting your site? So we use the free Geolite IP geolocation database from MaxMind. This is easy to download and it's free. So if you want to load into your database, it's a way that you can do IP geolocation. So here you can see we're querying again from the RudderStack table. This is the unaggregated table, so we can get kind of the IP addresses. And then we're joining it with that Geolite data set in order to figure out where they are. And Geolite just helps us return country name and ISO code. And then we can go from this sort of complicated query back into a no-code hex visualization where we just kind of, again, drop in the data frame, select a few coloring options, and we have a great looking chart. And then lastly, kind of getting into, how you can go beyond what Google Analytics provides. Even though we've already talked about that some with, having kind of access to this raw data, you can go further and do forecasting. Since Hex, you can combine SQL and Python. We'll first grab that data with SQL, just what the session data looks like over time. Then we can use Profit in order to create a forecast based on that data, set some parameters, and then visualize that data. Again, this is probably being heavily influenced by these outliers, and your data obviously will look probably pretty different. But this is, again, mostly here to demonstrate that you can just bring in whatever type of modeling forecasting you'd like into this type of notebook to suit it to your needs. So this is mostly for a demo, but would love to see the sorts of additional charts and graphs you would put in to the dashboard, into your own dashboard. And with that wraps up kind of the demo here, and we will move it to Q&A. So give me. All right. Thank you, everybody, for patiently waiting with your questions. So for the first one in Zoom that I see is around, can we get access to the Hex dashboard code? Yes. So part of the work here was to make this duplicatable. So I'll actually share my screen one more time here just to show you. So here is what this dashboard looks like. I'll drop this link into, or I'll drop it into the chat. Let me drop it into everyone. And we'll send this all in a follow-up email as well. But yeah, you can go to this link. You can click get a copy, and it'll duplicate this whole notebook into your workspace. So then you can edit the code however you see fit. There's a little bit of work involved in terms of connecting your data to this notebook. But if you're using the RudderStack set of DBT packages, it should be like not exactly automatic, but pretty close. And we are happy over here at Hex to help you get this wired up so you can take full advantage. So great question. Let me pull up other ones here. Maybe a question for the RudderStack guys. RudderStack connecting to non-sampled BigQuery, question mark. In other words, they are parsing the JSON for us, then we have access to all those fields. If you want to take a swing at answering that, Eric or Benji?
Sure, I'll take a stab. Yes. So the native RudderStack SDKs, so our JavaScript SDK, it's a very simple snippet you install in your website. When that will pick all of those fields that we saw in the demo, and then whatever custom properties or user traits, and send that in a JSON payload to RudderStack. And if you connect your BigQuery warehouse to RudderStack, RudderStack will then flatten that payload and set each of those properties or traits as a separate column, or you have the flexibility to store that as JSON objects in your warehouse as well. And then so you can query directly off that with Hex, or because we get this request from a lot of customers, we went ahead and kind of with the Hex team's help built a DBT package to kind of pre-model some of that data to make it a little easier to get these dashboards up and running.
Great. And if anybody has follow-up questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A as well. Next question here was around how granular can GeoLight get with location? Yeah, I only was using it here for country. I haven't played around with it super in depth, but I believe I think if you're using GeoLight 2, that you can get down to the zip code level. It was very easy to use for what I was doing with the country boundaries and the IP addresses. So highly recommend checking it out. Nice, great free resource.
One additional thing, Matt, just to add in there. We have a lot of customers who will use RudderStack's transformations feature to do a reverse lookup to just append some data to the page view payload. So transformations just allows you to write like a simple JavaScript or Python code. And you can do a number of things, but one of them is you can hit external APIs. And so we'll actually have, people may have a preferred API that they use for geolocation or reverse geolocation. And then you can sort of append that to the payload in a way that makes it really easy, like to build like really incredible charts in hex. So a number of ways to slice that, just depending on how you're trying to do the geo stuff.
Awesome. And maybe another one for your RudderStack guys. The mapping from GA to internal data is still at the dimension level, common to both GA and internal, but there is no direct unique key for mapping. Is my understanding correct?
Let's see, I'm looking at this question. Okay, the mapping from GA to internal data is still at the dimension level, common to both GA and internal.
I think one thing to clarify, the RudderStack SDKs will use a first-party cookie and persist a unique anonymous ID for that user. And so the RudderStack ingested data in the warehouse has a user level anonymous ID associated with all those page calls. So it is, if I'm understanding the question, it is more granular than GA.
Yeah, 100%. So yes, you can do that dimension level mapping and sort of get the same like one-to-one on some dimensions you're tracking with GA. But you can think about the RudderStack payload as doing that, but probably 75% more in terms of the level of fidelity and amount of data that you can get in the payload. And you can do it on a user level, which is really important for that full funnel journey.
Awesome. I'll take this softball question. Will the recording of this webinar be made available? Yes. Yeah, there'll be a follow-up email to everybody who attended and registered with both the link to the recording as well as the link to that dashboard, so you can copy it into your own workspace. I think another kind of question here, digging in for RudderStack folks, how do you do identity resolution on anonymous and unknown and known users? Would we have to do that?
Yep. So I can take the first pass at this, and then Benji, tell me if I'm right. So when you think about website traffic, a majority of that from most sites is anonymous, and then a user performs some sort of behavior that that gives you some sort of known identifier for them. So if they fill out a form or make a purchase, you're going to get an email, a phone number, etc. And so the RudderStack SDKs provide a way for you to first assign a unique identifier to that anonymous traffic. So each of the individual users, to Benji's point, there's a first-party cookie. We also are working on cookieless tracking, so reach out if you have questions about that. There's a first-party cookie, so each individual anonymous user gets an anonymous ID. And then when they perform an action where they are assigned a unique identifier, phone, email, etc., you can run the identify method in the SDK, and that actually connects the anonymous ID to the known ID, and then that gets pushed to your warehouse. And so that is the foundation for you to connect all of their prior anonymous behavior to them as a known user. And then, of course, as we said before, like as they go into the app and all those subsequent actions, you now have the entire picture of the customer journey. So we automate most of that for you. You just need to implement a couple of the methods in the SDK. One other note, we also have a product that's coming out that will build a deterministic identity graph for you. So reach out if you're interested in that. You can build some really powerful reporting in Hex. We sort of build the nodes and edges, and then it makes certain analytics use cases a lot easier with sort of less, less hammering on the SQL.
Eric, and one more point just to add to that is that both the anonymous ID and user ID are then passed with all subsequent page calls or track calls that you make within the SDK. And so once you make that once you make that identify call, you now have kind of both those values in your data set.
Awesome. And can RudderStack to data warehouse load be scheduled to run at certain times? Can it be orchestrated with scheduling tools?
Eric, I'll take that one. So when you connect your warehouse, as the data is being ingested into the RudderStack data plane, it actually gets gets stored temporarily in an S3 bucket or GCS folder, and then you can schedule when that data then gets replicated to your warehouse, either at 30-minute increments or every 24 hours, or via a cron-like scheduling. We do not have that particular sync exposed via API, maybe a good product suggestion. We do have a reverse ETL product, so that's where we take data out of the warehouse and send it to cloud tools, and that can be scheduled with the same scheduler or with external tools and via hit API. So
yeah, and just one thing to add on there. You can add multiple warehouse destinations and sort of filter the events that are going there. So one use case for a more real-time type data flow there, we have some customers who load certain events every 10 minutes or so into the warehouse, and then they'll run analytics on Hex specifically around things like A/B testing so that they get statistically significant results, sort of every 20 minutes or something. So like, big e-commerce companies and other situations. So they'll also run pipelines in RudderStack to the warehouse that run in, sort of near real time in terms of like warehouse loads for those particular use cases. And most of our customers who are doing that sort of run both. So they'll run a batch job, every 6, 12, 24 hours, every hour. And they have some pipelines that will run really, really fast, to sort of get those statistically significant results as fast as they can.
And I think one more RudderStack question for you guys here. Can RudderStack support custom data fields? For example, using company provided user GUIDs instead of auto-generated?
yes.
Yeah, always good when it's a single word answer.
Yes, completely configurable. So when we think about the product journey, so we get the anonymous ID, then we can get a unique identifier like email. And then if you sign up for the app, like you can use that as the primary, you can set that as the primary ID. So that method for identifying users flows all the way through the entire life cycle. And you can sort of establish those unique identifiers to be whatever you want, and is very flexible. And of course, like the key is that RudderStack associates all of this to the same user downstream in the warehouse, so that you can build those user level analytics in Hex.
But you can also set the anonymous ID to some value, to whatever value you want. You don't have to use our auto-generated one.
Awesome. And then I think probably the last question here before we, or maybe a few more snuck in. So we'll try to get the rest of these answered, and then we'll wrap it up probably in about 5 minutes. So One of the questions here was, thanks for the link. I'd like to make a copy and import a sample data set to be able to play with this. Do I need to download any sort of app or have an account to be able to use this demo? Thought I asked while we have you here. Yeah, so this should be, you should be able to duplicate this project. You will have to have a Hex account since it's inside of Hex, but we've made this a demo data set of what you saw today. So you should be able just to play with it as is with our demo. If you want to wire up your own, obviously free to do that however you'd like. It's easiest to rewire using the RudderStack DBT packages that we discussed, which again, that link will also be in the follow-up email. So you'll have a complete list of how to do that, as well as the link to that. It's also baked into the notebook side of this app. So when you're looking inside of the notebook, there's links in there about how to do it. So it's fully documented, so you can run with it pretty easily. Another question here. Speaking more to companies switching to a warehouse approach as GA forces migration to GA4, what trends have you noticed with this? I'm curious if there's a herd of companies leaving GA, and if you've noticed if GA is doing anything to stem that flow. What else is Hex and I would assume and RudderStack doing to be ready? Maybe I'll first give the Hex perspective. The RudderStack guys know way more about this because they're helping people with this exact problem all the time. So from Hex's perspective, we're an extremely flexible, powerful tool. So we're, as much as you want to write SQL and Python, we can basically replicate any sort of analytics experience that's out there. It's just kind of like how much effort is in order to create it. And so what we're trying to do is trying to create a bunch of these examples for people. So you can just spin it up and not have to, go through the effort to kind of rebuild these types of charts. And then it makes our lives super easy when a company like RudderStack kind of pre-models the data. It's often one of the hardest parts to do. And they're also providing a whole other level of data access, which allows you, again, to extend what's possible on top of these traditional kind of analytics tools like Google Analytics. But I'll let RudderStack also take a swing at this question.
Sure, and would love to have a longer conversation, but I know we're close to the end here. So briefly, I think what we're seeing happen at most companies is that the marketing team is still really heavily reliant on Google Analytics, and a lot of them probably still want to use Google Analytics 4. And I think what we're seeing data teams and analysts adapt to is the idea that that's fine for a very limited number of use cases, where you maybe want to see easy access to content performance or other things in GA4. That's fine. When you get down to sort of user level analytics and reporting on things that relate to core KPIs for the business as it relates to web analytics, most of our customers are migrating those sorts of web analytics flavored reports to the warehouse and then using Hex to do all the visualizations and distribute those within the company. RudderStack allows you to do both. So you can send the data directly to GA4 through our event stream integration to make the marketing team happy. And then, if I may be so bold, the real work is happening in Hex on the warehouse data, on the raw data. Generally, you're going to see a pretty big disparity there in terms of the data fidelity. And so one thing to be aware of is that the marketing team may see less page views because of Google Analytics black box sampling and processing. The warehouse data is going to give you, we see consistently 10 to 20% more volume, hence more accuracy. And so, we're also seeing dynamics where, sort of the marketing team may be looking at GA4 and then they come to the analytics team for the real answer on something. And so, again, still useful. We see the hybrid approach, but, sort of anything sort of beyond the basic web analytics content evaluation that relates to core KPIs is being done on the warehouse and tools like Hex.
I think just to add one comment to that, I mean, historically, marketing teams or the principal users of GA just haven't had access to other offline data or other data that's in the warehouse, and so their audience building, their ad budgeting has always been done on kind of a very limited set of data or exposure to what the users are actually doing. And so once they get exposed to seeing the full spectrum of data by building these reports in the warehouse, it's a pretty easy sell at that point. And then with the advent now of more companies having data teams, centralizing the report building and scaling that pretty quickly, I think we'll continue to see this trend accelerate, especially as we get closer to July of this year.
And someone I didn't hear, maybe a semi-spicy question, taking a stab at Segment here a little bit. Does this replace the need for something like Segment for identity? I.e., for me, a use case is UTM resolution for conversion events for something like an OAuth login.
100%. So, like half of our customers come from Segment. Great product, but just a very different approach. If you want the full transparency on your warehouse, then RudderStack is the choice. And then please reach out to me or Benji, or go to our website. Our profiles product will solve that for you. We have lots of customers with that exact use case. So definitely reach out.
And I think the last question on here is, will we be able to map search queries to a final conversion event, payment, for example?
Yeah, Matt, maybe I'll take a very high level at that, and then you can talk from the Hex perspective. But yeah, so with RudderStack, you would track both of those events. So you could track, we track all of the searches on our docs website, for example. And so we have all that data. And then when you send those events to the warehouse, they have the user's anonymous ID and then the known ID. And then if they make a payment downstream, you can tie those together and get the full customer journey. And Hex makes that super easy.
Yeah, we were actually going to add a funnel conversion chart on the dashboard, but we found that all the GA data is standardized, so you can just kind of plug and play with RudderStack's package. But once you get into how people's payments are set up or what they're doing inside the app, that's all unique. So we decided to not include that in the dashboard because it wouldn't be completely replicatable or just duplicatable. But totally something you can build, and that we've built before, where you can show that whole journey in Hex. So great question. And perfect question to one that came in just now to wrap the call. What's the best way to contact y'all post this session? So we'll be sending out an email that'll have all the links that we mentioned, contact information for both Hex and RudderStack. So if you want to talk to either of us, you can do that. Or if you just want to start by duplicating the dashboard into your own Hex workspace, play with it, get a feel for how in-depth RudderStack's data is, and then talk to us, you can do that as well. Or I don't know about Eric and Benji, but if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter with any questions as well, happy to talk about any of this stuff with y'all.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. We help customers build this all the time, and it's a wonderful stack. Benji and I do this, every day, even for our own company. So yeah, please reach out. We're all happy to help. These are tricky problems, tricky migration. So yeah, we're here to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And again, we'll send out an email with all the links, recordings, and that probably in a couple of days. Thank you all for attending, and thanks, Eric and Benji, for doing this with me. It was fun.
Anytime, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Bye, everybody.